Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. My guest today is Ramin Mazaheri. Ramin is the chief Paris correspondent for Press TV, where he has lived for the last 11 years. He's also the author of a number of books, including Socialism's Ignored Success, Iranian Islamic Socialism, as well as I'll Ruin Everything You Are, Ending Western Propaganda on Red China. He's currently back in the U.S. to cover the political situation here leading up to the election. Welcome back, Ramin. You were in Kenosha recently covering the shooting of Jacob Blake and the protests thereafter. And you wrote in your article that what's interesting about today's America is that one can finally hear voices in public which tell the truth about American racism, classism, and imperialism. So tell me more about that and what effect you think it will have.
You know, it's interesting that you picked up on that. Today, I did an interview with the editor-in-chief of the Final Call newspaper. That is the nationwide publication of the Nation of Islam. And we had a great conversation, a very intelligent guy, obviously. And the last thing he said, he was stressing the need for us in America to finally have these types of difficult conversations. He said, but the problem is that we're having these conversations now, but they're not leading to actions. I think that all three of us are cognizant of this issue where it is the old sort of Irish joke, don't talk about religion or politics. Mm-hmm. Well, this is something which is extremely retarding to political growth. In America, I think that Black people certainly have wanted to talk about politics, economics, religion, very serious social issues, white Americans in general, because it would force them to talk about the eradication of Native Americans, the enslavement and Jim Crow treatment of African Americans, the role of the United States in imperialistic activities all over the world. They have said, you know what, we're just not going to go there. We're just not going to touch any of these issues. And the election of Trump, the great thing about it, Trump has pulled the sheet off of American fascism. Yes, what Mr. Muhammad said is that Trump is at the same time the most dishonest and the most honest president ever, because he is saying things about white supremacy. He's saying things about open fascism, and this is the sort of great thing about Trump, in that he's forced America to finally talk about these serious issues. But will it lead to actual action? We'll have to wait and see. But it's, as I wrote, it's great that we are having some of these discussions in public. Some of them are going too far into identity politics, but I mean, I got to believe this is a step in the right direction.
You mentioned something that I know I get concerned about as well, and that's the role of identity politics here. And we've got protests in the streets of many cities around the country, which are about systemic racism and about especially racism by police, but they kind of need to be in other things as well. And I get afraid they're going to be just derailed by the upcoming election and all of that.
I know that you are totally spot on. You understand the divisive role of identity politics. And this is absolutely something which is created to divide and conquer domestically. This is imperialism at home. I was talking about this today with the guy from the Final Call, saying, look, today's story is not about blacks. It's not about Muslims. It's about economics. My story today for Press TV is about 16 million jobless claims. We need political correctness is a wonderful advance, but it is just a lens to view things through. It's interesting, we need not just the white view of 60 million unemployed people. We need the Black Muslim view of 60 million unemployed people. But what identity politics does is say, no, we only need to talk about, Black Muslims only need to have Black Muslim views about Black Muslim issues. No, we use political correctness as a lens to view things through. But the larger view is that Black, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Hindu, we're all American citizens, and that has to be the superseding dominant view. This is something that has only been achieved in countries which have had revolutions after 1917, after the Russian
Hmm.
Revolution. So it is the only ideology which has reconciled different ethnicities, different religions, both genders. The Soviet Empire was famously the only empire where the center bled itself for the periphery because it
Hmm.
was against congregate power in just one area, in just one group, and in just one in just one urban zone. It's all about socialism is all about expanding reach democratically power and money, to all the ethnicities. So this is something that is endemic in capitalism, which is so individualistic as opposed to the collective mentality of socialism. That's why we have identity politics. I mean, and I remember after Trump won, there was an anti-Trump protest in Paris, and I covered it for Press TV. And somebody had a sign there, who she must have been American, and it was something like Ukrainian, lesbian, American, anti-Trump. It also had, I think, left-handed, living in the west side of the city. I mean, how many identity groups could this person find? But it was just so typical of those who oppose Trump and that they want to divide themselves into further and further little tribes. And that's the opposite of socialism, which brings all the tribes together. And I should point out, that was part of the political revolution of Islam, in that Prophet Muhammad was saying we are not tribes, we are united by something greater.
Yeah, you've got a book out on the now about Iran and its socialist revolution, which most people don't realize Iran is socialist, I think.
It's called Socialism's Ignored Success, Iranian Islamic Socialism.
Yeah, we ignore the success of all socialisms in this country.
Precisely, yes.
But to get back to this split, Trump has really making his campaign now a sort of splitting. I mean, it's more than just the usual marketing differentiation thing, but he's saying that Joe Biden and the Democrats are dangerous Marxists, and they're in league with the people who are looting in the streets, and he's the only one that can bring law and order back. This seems a fairly thinly disguised reach out to people who are white supremacists or who, again, splitting people up. And even on the Democratic side, what I'm seeing is that Democrats are fighting among themselves about how much or whether to support Joe Biden, who really does not stand for anything progressive at all. But we seem to be fragmenting rather than coming together.
Well, I think that, as far as, this law and order and, it being, a white supremacist thing, I'm not really sure that I agree there. I mean, I read a poll recently, and who knows, it's just one poll, but that the approval rating for Trump among African Americans is now up to 24%. I think that the law and order appeal goes beyond race, because the areas which are the worst hurt by violence are the poor minority areas. And
Right.
many people there want law and order. Of course, they want physical security. That's the reason why we have any sort of government. So I think that this law and order thing, we can say that, I mean, there are going to be elements of white supremacy to that, but they're minor. I think the larger thing is that we have to remember minorities, they want physical security too. So
Sure.
I think that there's a consensus here in America that Democrats have sort of fomented instability and have not condemned looting as opposed to legitimate political protest. But Democrats have really, fomented instability in order to win an election. But it's very possible this is going to backfire, because the law and order vote is not just a white vote, it's a Hispanic vote, it's a black vote, it's a vote for conservatism, which supersedes ethnic points of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have a point there with the law and order. I mean, there's a differentiation here between actual law and order and a sort of racist form of policing in which, a young white man walking with a submachine gun with his hands in the air is given a glass of water. And if a young black man did the same thing, he would have been shot multiple times. I mean, it's that kind of disparity in the way police treat different groups. And there's also, we're seeing a lot more now about the links between police forces or law enforcement and the white supremacist militias and these other groups. There tends to be a lot of overlap in terms of membership, and certainly here in Oregon, when the two are facing each other, when the Black Lives Matter facing the Trump supporters, the police put their back to the Trump supporters and face against the Black Lives Matter people. So, I mean, even little things like that. I mean, that has to go. I mean, there has to be, there needs to be serious change, whether it's defunding the police or whatever. There needs to be serious change to stop that kind of racism.
I hear you, and what you're saying is, makes really a lot of sense. I mean, in France, the cops voted for the National Front, the far-right National Front, 60% of the time. So I think that that really shows that cops are always drawn from the most reactionary elements of society. They're always going to be on the right wing. There are a lot of radical leftists who are creating the types of violence which are not leftist, which are destructive, which are, not legitimate. It's not always, of course, it's not black and white. I mean, I've seen in France countless times where Antifa has been infiltrated by obvious police, by cover police. So it's not multifaceted, but as a leftist, we have to say, I have to say that there's a lot of violence going on that I don't support. And I have to come out and say that, I understand the good motivations of people like Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, there are good impulses where they're trying to provide security in a context of a government that is totally left the field. I mean, people have a right to defend their houses and their homes. The larger issue is the failure of the government to fulfill its function, especially under neoliberalism, where it can't respond to a crisis, whether it's physical insecurity, whether it's healthcare insecurity, pandemic insecurity. So I think that, we on the left, and this is an article that I, wanted to write, the left's failure to understand Kyle Rittenhouse. I see a lot of, parallels, just to bring up sort of a different topic, with him and someone in the Iranian Basij or someone in the Cuban Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. The problem is that Rittenhouse and people like him, they're not motivated by leftism, but the larger point is that leftists also need to defend property, need to defend people, need to defend situations where people are going to go homeless. And I think that the left is going to, when they see Rittenhouse, and maybe I'm wrong, you tell me, when they see Rittenhouse, they see what a right-wing fascist. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And I saw on, I think it was CNN, or it might have been MSNBC, same thing, where they said that this guy's, Rittenhouse is affiliated with white supremacist militias, and that hasn't been proven to be at all. I'm just saying, some of these right-wing people, some of these pro-Trump supporters, they have to be won over, and they can be won over to the left. And we have to realize that some of the things that they're saying and doing, if they were in Cuba, we would be defending them. If they were in Iran, we would be defending them. So it's certainly very, very complicated. Very, very complicated.
Well, yeah, and I think you touched on it in there, but I think the big thing is not only physical security, which the government is not providing, but any kind of security. There's no economic security. There's no health security. There's no job security. There's nothing. I mean, it's basically everybody's on their own. And that really is a result of, we have 40 years of neoliberalism to thank for a lot of that.
You got it. But I just have to, agree with you. I mean, it's just insecurity everywhere over here. I mean, Iran right now is under, economic war, but the prices for basic goods, people can afford them. There is stability. In France, they have universal health care, universities, but here it's just like you can't even walk down the street, and if you fall, and you get hurt, you're going to be homeless. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
security
Yeah.
at so many levels.
I was thinking maybe we would switch off subjects a little bit here and go, because I know you've written books on China, and there's a lot right now going on. The West basically has two main so-called human rights complaints against the Chinese government, which of course is now referred to as the Chinese Communist Party by the Trump administration folks. The one of them is the treatment of the Hong Kong protesters, and the other is the treatment of the dissident Uyghur population in Xinjiang. Can you shed some light on these two issues and what is really going on in China and what we should be thinking about?
As regards, the Muslim population in China, I mean, are we supposed to believe after invasions of Iraq, Afghanistan, after their support of these Muslim Arab monarchs that are the most reactionary, as monarchs always are, the most reactionary elements in the world? Are we supposed to honestly believe that the Pentagon and the State Department all of a sudden care, and the mainstream media, corporate dominated U.S. mainstream media, all of a sudden they care about Muslims in China? I don't think any Muslim believes that all of a sudden that these reactionary elements care about the Muslims in China or Muslims in general. I mean, anybody with half a brain in their head can realize that this is obviously propaganda, what's going on in China, and they're just throwing stuff at a wall and sees what sticks. And of course, what sticks is whatever the mainstream media, the corporate-dominated U.S. mainstream media, it sticks. Advertising works. Whatever sticks is what they repeat. So anything you read in the mainstream U.S. media about Muslims in general, you should disbelieve, and especially in China, being Chinese and Muslim theoretically should be like being black and Muslim in the United States or in France, where it should be worse. But somehow, being Chinese and Muslim has paradoxically, you've become a cause célèbre. You become, all of a sudden, you're one of the quote unquote good guys, to use, the worldview of George W. Bush. So totally preposterous. I think we have to side with the Chinese government in terms of initially side with them because they have not invaded any Muslim countries and they have almost eradicated absolute poverty. When they say that they're giving job training and they say that, they are, trying to do things that are going to lift people in West China out of poverty, well, that's what they did in Tibet. That's what they've done all over China. So they certainly deserve the benefit of the doubt. As far as the Hong Kongers, you cannot find a more nativist movement than you can in Hong Kong. Nativist in the sense that if you're not a Hong Konger native ethnically, you are scum to these people. I mean, if you're Japanese, if you're mainland Chinese, if you're Thai, you have no place in the Hong Kong anti-Chinese movement. If you like teriyaki sauce from Japan, you have no place in this nativist movement. It's exactly like the worst elements of the Make America Great Again Trumper movement, or the French people who want to kick out all the Muslims, kick out all the non-French, the National Front, the worst elements there. And it's just incredible that these Hong Kongers, that they're getting so much support, but it's just the hypocrisy of it all in terms of, the Chinese Muslims getting elevated, the Hong Konger nativists getting elevated. It follows no rhyme or reason if you're looking at it from a point of view of genuine human rights, of genuine honesty, of genuine justice. It's all whatever benefits the State Department of the United States, benefits of the global 1%. So I hope that clears it up to you.
I think there's a lot of parallels there. Yeah, I've always found that the idea that we would call somebody a protester for freedom and democracy when they are advocating a return to colonialism, just to be a little bit too much to bear. But that
you got
seems
it. It's really what you said is a perfect example of how reactionary the Hong Kong protest movement is.
Mm-hmm. But this is all really about. I mean, there's a demonization thing is going on, and the U.S. always demonizes nations that don't follow in lockstep with the U.S., whether it's Russia, Iran, China, Venezuela, whatever. I mean, and China is that now. And of course, they're being blamed for everything. It's their virus. It's they're stealing our jobs. We're now trying to prevent their companies from competing in the free marketplace that we say that we like. I mean, the free marketplace is wonderful unless you're Huawei or TikTok. And that seems to me the best way of looking at this China thing. What is the benefit to the U.S. power elite to causing this rift between the U.S. and China?
Precisely. I mean, the free market is absolutely wonderful, and I love it if I was the number one dog. Free markets, great, but not when you're even number two, because then you're just going to get swallowed up. Well, like what you're saying about the victimization, we have to realize how this is inherent in American capitalist imperialist culture. I mean, if we weren't demonizing the native, the American Indians or the blacks, we are demonizing each other. It is the Democrats demonizing the anti-Trumpers. It is liberals demonizing and not being able to see even one human impulse in Kyle Rittenhouse. I bring him up again because I never did write that article, but I just think he's so emblematic of why the left in the U.S. is so unable to win over people who are viewed as right wing. And I guess you don't have to in America, because this is a two-party system, first past the post. And if you don't vote for the winner, your vote is worthless. There's no proportional representation, and it's just this two-party system is just so negative in creating these zero-sum games, and it just feeds the American propensity for vilifying people. I just came out with a new article on Press TV. They actually came up with the first part. Is there going to be a hot fall for Trump where, Trumpers get out in the street, guns ablazing? It's the OK Corral. I think it's going to be the opposite. I think it's going to be not a hot fall, but an icy crusade where Democrats lose and they go on this continued icy crusade where they're doing this evangelistic street corner preaching of telling their fellow Americans how to feel, how to live, what to think, just like they do for non-Americans. That's the biggest thing that for this country that people need to kind of wake up and say, look, we have to be patriotic. I'm just astounded at the journalism that I see here, especially on TV. They act like the biggest tragedy would be is if their candidate doesn't win. I mean, they're willing to destroy this country, instead of being patriotic and saying, well, if I lose, I lose, but I'm not going to destroy the country. So many people here appear to be so power hungry that they're willing to crucify the Rittenhouses, crucify the MAGA hat wearers in order just to get power. And that's not patriotism. That's not patriotism. I mean, countries like, for example, Iran, you have just as down and dirty politics as you do here. But there's an ultimate basis saying, you know what? We're not going to neuter and destroy and gut our own country. They don't go that far. But I don't see that floor here in the United States.
No, I don't. I mean, we've gotten to the point that we just make the other side virtually Hitler. And you talk in that same article that when you came out today about how Democrats have to abandon their moral self-righteousness, and it strikes me that what we've had for the last 4 years is basically attack after attack on Trump, on Trump's morality. Basically, that Trump is not a moral person. Well, voters knew that going in. They've never tried to assess, how are we going to really attract more people? How can we have a positive program that will help the country? All they've done is beat up on Trump.
Well, you hit the nail on the head that these rabid anti-Trumpers don't get. Voters knew that going in. You said, they knew that Trump's morality is subpar, to say the least. They knew that going in. So why are Democrats and liberals unable to start to accept it, to take that as a given, to take that as a starting point? The reality was illustrated so hilariously in Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And I haven't read that in 30 years, but as I recall, it is this northeastern Yankee going into King Arthur's court and telling them, this is how you live. This is what you should think. Mm-hmm. You're dumb. I'm smart. And, Twain was, from Missouri. And this evangelistic mentality, the liberals in the United States, they associate that with like the button-down Republican and the person in the Pentagon. No, there is this self-righteous know-it-allism that is on the so-called left in the United States as well. And you're right. For 4 years, they've been trying to tell, Trumpers, you're immoral, you're a grass skirt wearing savage, you have to change. And they should have known, like you said right at the beginning, this is not going to work. This I'm good, you're evil mentality that is just so divisive. And
well, thanks, Ramin. I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. I really do. It's been great.
Appreciate you, and the stuff you do is really good. So it's an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks again to Ramin Mazaheri for joining me this week on Wider View. I'll post links to his recent writing in the show notes at widerviewradio.podbean.com. One message should be clear from this. We must start listening to one another and respecting one another's views, or this society will irretrievably break down. As always, the views expressed here are those of myself and my guests and may not reflect the views of the management of this radio station. We aim to make you think outside the box and question the narratives you've been hearing from the mainstream media. I hope we have succeeded. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening to Wider View.